Right. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, everybody joining us for this follow-up on our wonderful AI Summit from Park City. I see several folks joining in. Dev and I are excited to do a bit of a recap. I see several of you here who also participated in the live event joining, so welcome back. Obviously, a lot has shifted in the world in the last 6 weeks, so we'll certainly recap for those that missed out and then pick up from where we left off as we kick things off here in a minute. Dev, welcome. Where are you dialing in from?
I'm over here in headquarters at Palo Alto, and just came in from San Francisco, which increasingly feels like the heart of AI these days. So excited to talk more about everything happening in AI and also everything happening in security, the intersection of those two.
You know what's funny is I'm literally just stepped out in Napa from the Salesforce AI conference to talk about this one. I think this one's more fun. So
The real
looking forward to
conversation about AI security and safety is happening here, not in Napa.
Yes, I think it's the best one here. Awesome. Look, to be respectful for the attendees that have joined in time, why don't we kick things off? For those of you that don't know us, I'm Varun Badwar, founder and CEO of Endor Labs. Dev, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, everyone, I'm Dev. I'm the GM for AI at Rubrik, a data backup and security company. Previously, I was co-founder and CEO for Predibase, an AI infra startup that joined forces with Rubrik via an acquisition.
So, for those of you that don't know, we brought a few leaders from a variety of companies. I think some of your management team might have been there as well. And really, the goal was to bring trailblazers from companies like Cursor in the room with some of the most monumental companies on the planet that may be more traditional enterprise coming in and really being a session where we're kind of working through workshops, interacting with everybody, learning from everybody. The pace of change around us is absolutely absurd. And I think the only way we can keep up is with us, learning from and sharing practices from each other. So just a quick couple of slides I'll bring up for those of you that didn't participate in the live session. Two things were very interesting for us, and maybe a little bit surprising. One was we asked and polled the folks in the room about where is the primary adoption of AI being driven from. And candidly, Dev, I don't know about you, but like certainly for me, I was expecting majority of that number to be board, CEO, CXO pushing down. And it was fascinating that majority of the drivers, over 65%, was actually engineering teams. Engineering teams seem to be blazing the trails. Well, look, it's no surprise. I think Anthropic just announced yesterday, right? It's like they've gone from a $14 billion revenue run rate to 19 in what, a couple months?
Yeah, that's right. I think it just came out on one of the conferences. They added $6 billion in February, is what rumor has it. So just growing unbelievably fast for any scaled company.
Yeah, it's outrageous, right? And obviously their claim to fame, they came in a little bit later than OpenAI, but they were focused on the engineering, the technical, the coding use cases, and now they're obviously spawning off from there, and we'll talk more about that. So that was kind of one really interesting piece, and we'll get into some of the more recent news here as well. The second piece, Dev, I want you to cover this because like we're obviously looking around and saying what are the whole things holding people back from operationalization? So what'd you take away?
Yeah, it's funny because we had this conversation in Park City about a month and a half ago, and it feels like everything we talked about has just accelerated in the last month since we ended up covering it. When we met at the end of January, what we were talking about was how governance and guardrails were actually the primary challenge to AI adoption. By the way, this isn't like just within like a risk framework, what are your primary challenges? It's like if you thought about the entire ecosystem of what could be challenging, it wasn't about model quality, it wasn't about cost, it wasn't about performance testing. Those are all things that I think, make the top 10. But if you force the people to go ahead and select one, the number one barrier is they don't have a way to be able to manage the risk around actual AI and AI agents. The reason I say that it's funny about what's happened even over the last month is I think that we've seen this compound. So, Vern, you mentioned that engineering is the one that is really driving a lot of the AI adoption. And I think the reason for that is like the killer use case today is around code. And code allows you to be able to do so much inside of an organization. It allows you to be able to go ahead and construct new applications, move faster on product velocity. Even your internal tools are oftentimes some version of code. And the truth is, Claude feels like it's taking aim at different businesses and tanking different markets. I think as you're able to see kind of the code generation in Wave. The example I think that comes up is how much IBM shares fell after the release of the agents that could write COBOL pretty effectively, kind of the underlying language that is powering ATMs and a lot of legacy systems. So to me, I think, and then of course there was like the launch of Cloud Code Security as well. But to me, I think the thing that really resonated and stood out was the tools are getting better fast. They're honestly getting better faster than we can even learn how to be able to adopt them. The thing that's actually holding people back from being able to use them is having an effective framework around governance guardrails. And as technologies like Cloud Code actually start to proliferate, I think it's going to put like a limelight in terms of what's the actual security posture of what a system like that is outputting.
It's strange. I don't even know how organizations build guardrails, right? Literally for the last 9 months, everybody was scrambling to go figure out how they're going to put guardrails for MCP, and there's all these MCP gateways popping up. And just when people were potentially putting a threat model together for MCP, it's like, well, that's old news. It's all about skills now. And like literally, you can write 5 sentences in English. And I don't know, for those of you that missed out, earlier this week, we in the industry, we caught a set of supply chain attacks with nefarious package updates, including for some security packages like from Trivi, from Aqua, where there were malicious versions of these packages that were literally giving instructions in English to your agents on your machines to perform a set of nefarious activities. So it's crazy, right? It's not even like pre-installed scripts, post-installed scripts. It's like people are coming at you in English. So all those people that were building these frameworks for MCP are now like, oh, well, the puck just shifted completely to skill. So what are you seeing? How do people even get around this? Because we don't know what we're going to wake up to tomorrow. That's a new threat model.
So I think that most people aren't doing it well, is my quick take. A lot of times what I find is like these guardrails exist in paper, not in practice. It's a committee somewhere that it looks like IT, InfoSec, legal, basically throw everybody that manages risk inside of an organization into one soup. And we're starting to create these frameworks or documents and trying to catch up. And the way that these get enforced is usually by like some committee meeting where you review like the agent design or the AI design. But I think that's too slow. It's going to miss also like 90% of like, I think the cases that actually can end up violating. The thing that I think is like the most powerful approach in this space actually is to use AI to help you secure and govern AI itself. And so, what we've been thinking about here at Rubrik is that it's really difficult to be able to write a rule system to be able to catch every single type of vulnerability that can happen, right? Or like every type of violation of a guardrail that can happen. So a really simple example I'll give is, let's imagine you say, hey, my agent should not give external users financial advice. That's like a guardrail you want to say. I have no idea how to write a rule system to be able to go ahead and catch that. I have no idea how to write a regex or a string match that will look for like buy, sell, and the 50 different ways that can be expressed. Instead, I think what we need to start doing is using AI systems to help you monitor and secure all of the flows that are coming out of these models so that we can actually write these. I think you said the attacks are written in natural language. I think these protections also need to start to use models themselves that can look at all the outputs in language and English and basically make the determination of whether or not this is a risk. And I think the same framework is going to happen for other areas too. So obviously you're much closer, I think, towards code security, but the rate at which these models are coming up with like the net new code, I think that now the top engineers at most of the top companies I speak to haven't written code in the last 2 months. Not have written, less code or only spend 20%, like they have not written code in the last 2 months. And I think that's going to introduce, just like these agents introduce a whole set of challenges with guardrails, and that's going to introduce a whole set of capabilities that need to be matched when it comes towards code security as well.
100%. Actually, that's the mandate that I'm driving in the company right now. I still have a lot of engineers caught up in kind of code autocomplete and, tab along the way. And my mandate has been like, we have not properly operationalized software engineering with AI unless you are not writing code, but you're really kind of living your life in prompts and plans. So again, English is becoming the world's fastest growing programming language in my mind, and there's security implications to that. By the way, like let's talk about the elephant in the room, because for the last 1 week I've had the most amount of fun with security leaders bringing me in to say, hey, Anthropic announced this code security thing. My leaders now believe, well, we don't need AppSec, we don't need security, we don't need tooling. What's going on? And it's just been amazing because everybody in the world is talking about code security now. Thank you, Anthropic. But there's fundamental challenges that I think we need to kind of grapple with, right? Which is this is a research project that Columbia University and Carnegie Mellon did in December, even with Claude 4 Sonnet. And we've actually done some checks even with now 4.6, Opus 4.6 and such. But foundationally, the agents are getting really good at creating functionally correct code to the point where 60, 65, 68% of code is now functionally correct. But only 10.5% of that is secure. And so what they did in this study at Columbia and Carnegie Mellon, they actually went and looked for the common CVEs, CWEs. They've created a fantastic harness of GitHub projects, real GitHub projects. They've kind of given it tasks to accomplish. And that's where they found that they were just replicating all of these vulnerabilities at a higher speed. And so that begs the question, like, wait a minute, if these models are getting so much better and faster at functional correctness, why aren't they more secure? And, you know, if you look at a real world example, we tested Cursor a few weeks ago, right, to build an application that basically tracks a board game collection. You can see the prompt on the left. Yeah, we did what a developer would do. Like, we didn't fill it with security prompts, et cetera, et cetera. We just said, build me this functional application. And guess what it did? It created an app in 10 minutes that didn't, by the way, fully work, but it introduced 65 critical CVEs and 700 issues in first-party code, right? From a logic perspective, et cetera. And so what I've been spending a lot of time around is really kind of going behind the scenes. Why are agents struggling to produce secure code? And obviously, I think it's important to understand the genesis of how they're learning how to code, which is open source, right? They're obviously learning from billions and trillions of lines of code available on the internet. And training, by the way, is a very expensive process, right? It costs billions of dollars to kind of run these things. And so, as you know, these training runs happen every few months, but the CVEs are emerging every day, every hour. And so they lack current context, but more importantly, even if they had the more current context, they are known to kind of pattern match and repeat a lot of what they are trained on, but they don't have the semantic understanding to say, well, you trained on this Spring version 4 that then subsequently 6 months later had 20 critical vulnerabilities that were fixed in this different piece of code, and thereby you should unlearn what you learned in Spring 4 training and the new stuff. And so this is a hard problem, right? Companies like Cursor, Anthropic, they can't come up overnight and go solve this problem. And so for us, you know, I've never been more excited about application security. Why? Code is exploding, right? The volume is surging. The vulnerabilities are scaling hyperlinearly, not even linearly, maybe somewhere between linear and exponential. There's actually a study that CodeRabbit did where AI is generating vulnerabilities and business logic flaws at a 67% higher rate than humans. They benchmarked this against some pull requests, like about several hundred pull requests. And security teams, there's just no way you can keep up manually. So, okay, so is the answer Claude Code security? And for me, it's a absolute no. I think it's phenomenal that they have created this buzz and the need and the interest for people to learn. And I think it's fantastic that you can now use LLMs to solve decade-old security problems. But for all of us here on the call, for our jobs to be effective, we need three things. We need these tools to be independent. Like, there's a reason even in code writing, there's an author and there's a reviewer. You've clearly seen from me the data about why these models can't be sufficiently effective in producing secure code. And so you have this independence layer between an agent, like say Claude 4 Sonnet, 4.6 Opus, whatever, writing the code, and you need specialists reviewing that for problems. You need a high degree of verifiability and customizability. Like, these are black boxes. You can't control what they're going to find, when they're going to find it. And in multiple runs, you can't even get them to produce the same findings. Good luck trying to go to your auditors and saying, oh, you know, I ran this last week, I had 50 problems. This week I have 57. I couldn't explain to you, if they're the same or different, or why did some of the 20 no longer show up? Were they fixed, or the agent just moved on and found something else? And just that's not reality. So I think to me, we look at platforms like Anthropic now proving to us that we can leverage them to solve problems like, what you were mentioning earlier. Why do we need to write linters and grep rules to find security issues? So we are finding unbelievable success in actually utilizing our proprietary knowledge of the customer's code and be able to kind of give them the context of the findings without any rules. And by the way, our triage agents have proven to reduce kind of the false positives in first-party code vulnerabilities by upwards of 90%. In fact, I think Rubrik's been using it, and we've got great feedback from the team there as well. So I wanted to kind of address the elephant in the room. I think it's on everybody's mind right now. I think many of the folks in this room attending today are being asked these questions by their management, like, why do we need security? And hopefully this perspective helps. The last piece I'll kind of cover off in a bit really is the evolution that we talked about this, and this kind of spurred off a lot of good conversation in the room around the SDLC.
Hey, Varun, this diagram is scary. Break it down for me. Like, help me understand the different pieces of it. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah. So look, color coding first. Like, software supply chain is still software supply chain, right? There you have workstations, people writing code. You have agents. You may have autonomous agents now performing what is around the developer workstation. You've got your CI/CD pipelines, and then you have things running in production. The yellow stuff is the stuff you've been dealing with for several years. The stuff in red is what's emerging as part of AI. Like I said, right, it's MCP servers, but like, look at this, right? This chart is now outdated because on the left should be skills now called out as a first party kind of problem and input into your developer workstations. You've got malicious rules that people can, again, deploy in English against your developers. And I think the craziest thing right now is your developer workstations or your agents soon that'll autonomously create code are your biggest attack vector today. And traditionally, we haven't thought about it that way. We haven't thought about the level of security requirements for developer workstations being fundamentally different. And then you look at in the pipeline, it's not just NPM and PyPy, it's models coming from open source, Hugging Face, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it just, without getting into a lot of detail, it gives you a way to think about your supply chain problems just being expanded to a greater degree. So hopefully that helps. Happy to take any questions.
I think one thing that I'm actually really curious about that we see today is like, you have this entire software supply chain for how these aspects are getting created, but the developer is getting more and more disintermediated from this. At least that's what I think is happening. And that means if I'm using Claude Code, I spoke with an engineer who basically said, look, honestly, I don't even read the code anymore. And that, I think, happened a few months ago. But now they're like, I don't even read the comments that like people are putting on the code reviews. I'm just pointing Claude over to it. And so as, it feels like, do you think that developers are getting more disintermediated from like this development lifecycle? And if that's the case, like, what do you think is going to end up being the way that, AI needs to help basically close the loop where developers are disintermediated?
100%. I was talking to some developers yesterday, and they said the output of the code is so darn good. Like, the way it presents the code, it feels so near perfect that you almost feel like it's not a good use of your time to review it. But frankly, code reviews are struggling. They're struggling for a variety of reasons. One, yes, developers don't have the bandwidth. Neither do security people. I mean, if you think developers don't have the bandwidth, think about security teams, especially AppSec, that are typically running one AppSec engineer to 200 developers. Like, there's no way on earth you can keep up with this. But there's a bigger problem. And that problem is, traditionally, security tooling has been very focused on the known knowns, right? The known vulnerabilities, CVEs, CWEs. But with AI, it's kind of making reckless mistakes, but they're more in the business logic layer. And like the point you made earlier, you can't write rules for every scenario that plays out. Like, we had this happen to a real customer recently, where our AI SaaS basically found a business logic issue where they were building some internal detection for finding secrets in code, hard-coded in code. And every time they found it, the log statement that they were producing in their logging system included the hard-coded secret. So it's like you were making the problem worse because now you were copying the secret, putting it in logs that hundreds of people have access to. Now, how do you write a rule and expect that to happen? Or we have seen things like this example right here. It's syntactically correct code, but you don't know here that doc ID is not correctly scoped and you're missing an authorization check, right? So you need a lot of context about your existing code and then the new PRs. People don't have the time, and your tooling and your programs have been too focused on the known that you're missing the things that will actually get you in the news, which is business logic flaws, right? In a scenario like credit card or gift card processing, it's a thing where somebody on the client can change the amount of a gift card. Like that would be kind of crazy to have happen. But how do you detect those things? So, again, the thing that Claude has proven to us with code security, conceptually, is you can indeed run agents to actually analyze this. So the only way you can keep up is you've got to have security trained, security specialized agents that are reviewing that code. But the difference is you need to be able to have inputs and control on how that workflow works. What are the things that are important to your business in English? And having a full context of existing application. And therein lies a problem. Anthropic's business is about selling you more tokens, right? They would love for you to keep indexing your entire code base to build that context. For you over time, that's an extremely expensive value proposition. And so how do you get sharper and smarter about that is, I think, a really hard problem. And for those of you that don't know, yesterday we launched Ori, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Ori, but it's our agentic platform. And the whole idea here that I'll call out, and we can take it offline if anybody has questions, is we want to harness all of the practices of LLMs, but we want to bring context, rich context about your application, such that these agents can be really smart about understanding your code, understanding the security challenges that you have, understanding your architecture, understanding your data flows, such that they can act more deterministically, consistently, and verifiably on finding issues in your code. But Dev, in the interest of time, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's go back to the governance piece, right? We talked about how much has shifted in, even since we met in middle of January. But walk us through some of the insights you gleaned there. I think you had a couple of good high points in your surveys. I think it'd be helpful for this audience.
Definitely. No, I think, it's funny because I think we secure different parts of the overall AI acceleration cycle that's happening inside of enterprises. I think about Endor as, being able to provide the code security for one of the most popular ways that these agents are being deployed today, like in Claude Code. And we think about Rubrik being able to provide a framework for just how do we want to be able to manage, control, and secure like these agents that are running at a higher level, especially the custom agents that people are building. Let me go and share, one thing that I think just underscores your point, which is, I took this from like one of our internal Slacks, which is our Claude Code Slack. And pretty much every single day, what I see is like a request from an engineer that says, can you increase my budget? Can I go ahead and use more and more kind of this? So to your point, I think two things are really happening. The first is like the vast majority of these folks are engineers. So you're seeing a strong uptake inside of organizations like Rubrik, I think, around this. And then the second is, I think that you actually are seeing the same like token economics really show up in terms of like how we are already running through essentially the quotas and the budgets that we have around it. Like my guess is that as you kind of predicted, we're going to need a different system of models to be able to actually help you govern and secure the outputs of AI. Because I don't think you could, reasonably say we're just going to double or triple the cost by adding on like these AI layered security pieces, this like AI driven governance. I wanted to just walk through a couple of the different highlights that I think we had from the Endor Labs Summit at the end of January, and really talk about what were the key pieces that we gleaned from the conversation. So I'm actually not going to spend very much time at all talking about like how do we approach this from a product or architecture standpoint, because I thought instead what was one of the most useful things was actually just learning from the people in the room about where they were in the journey and kind of the data that we got out of that. So I'm going to walk through a couple of different highlights that I think, underscore the main points we heard. And it's funny, a lot of the data that we actually ended up sharing came from a combination of like the conversations we had in the room, but also these surveys that we put together with, for example, CIO.com and others that were understanding across InfoSec, IT, and engineering leaders what was the primary challenge that they were facing when it came towards developing AI. Now, the first thing I think is, when we ran the survey, which was at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, the vast majority of them are actually actively building agents, or they're planning to. And so out of the hundreds of companies that we surveyed, I think only like 7% said that they either didn't have plans or were unsure. Everybody else is using agents and planning to be able to go ahead and build and use agents. Some of this is using the out-of-the-box capabilities that something like Claude Code gives you. Many of them are using some of the out-of-the-box agent platforms that make it easy to build your own in a low-code or no-code way, like Copilot Studio might be able to give you. I think thing that is important to understand when it comes towards the enterprise adoption curve is that there's usually a few different steps that I think it goes through. The first is, you go in an experimentation phase, and then you go into a formalization phase. The difference between experimentation and formalization is in the experimentation, there's not really much stakes usually in it. It's basically you playing around to be able to understand what the technology can do. And formalization is what we think about when people are actually like shipping out something into production overall. Then there's the proliferation stage, which is where you start to get more of these actually built out. I like to say that, building your first 2 or 3 agents might take a while, but you get to agent number 50 or 100 actually quite quickly. Then there's the stage that I think not that many people are in right now, but coding is probably the first use case that's starting to push this, which is autonomous. Which is I'm not even really looking at kind of the outputs. Like the model is just fully doing the work, and it's doing it in an end-to-end way, where it's actually delivering a large part of that value directly. So we asked a number of the folks that are kind of in the room, like where were the organizations when it came in, and I think we saw a pretty consistent thread here, which was that I'd say half of the organizations are probably still in experimentation phase, but just a little bit of under half are actually starting to graduate past that. They're in formalization, they're in proliferation. And I think the biggest prediction that we made, and then also a number of the folks in the room made, is that this is going to shift pretty dramatically over the course of the next 12 months. And I bet even if we looked at it over the next, last 2 months, you've probably seen some of these people move from experimentation to formalization and proliferation as these tools actually become a little bit easier to use. In our broader enterprise survey, as I mentioned, we spoke to people in security leadership, IT leadership, in security operations, engineering and architecture. And really, I think what we started to see was they're starting to put a fair amount of spend behind enterprise AI. Just so you looked at like the individual department or organization that person was in charge of, typically tended to be like a multi-million-dollar budget as the most common answer towards AI-related initiatives over the next 12 to 18 months. And so the spend is there, and it isn't like the desire to be able to actually put more firepower behind this is the part that's slowing things down. Instead, what we did is we actually asked people, and I think, Vern, you hinted towards the answer towards this at the very beginning. It's what is the number one barrier towards deploying AI agents? And if you think about it, like there are a number of different things that you could imagine. It could be like, right, testing and reliability. Are the models good enough? Do I have a good enough orchestration framework? I feel like there's so many orchestration frameworks that come up every single week or month. But really, if you force people to pick one, it's having a good framework around governance, guardrails, and compliance, just like we were talking about really at the beginning. And the really, I think, fascinating thing from a market shift landscape standpoint is like this is the thing that is in the number one purview or the top 3 purview of I would say a security team or an IT team at most Fortune 500s that I speak with today. People are actually looking for how are they supposed to go and govern, their AI systems. And 75% of the folks that we said we surveyed said that they're actually actively exploring the vendors and pilots right now. So most people don't have a solution in place yet. If you don't have a solution, I wouldn't worry. I think that's actually where most of the industry is. But if you're starting to look, I think that's actually directly where I think large part of like what current landscape really looks like. And you'll hear this as you speak with IT leaders and security leaders kind of across organizations. I think you'll hear things like governance lives in paper, not in practice. Or, hey, we're flying blind. We don't have visibility towards what's actually happening in any of these underlying systems. And so I wanted to just be able to, I think, wrap in sharing some of the data by just saying, like, there's a set of, like, I'll skip this and I'll just say there's a set of challenges that we think about when people are actually running AI agents at scale. And not just I think, and I think these applied not just for example, coding agents, which are very prevalent, but even for the custom agents that people are building inside of an organization. It's like, how do I get the answer to some basic questions like what agents are actually actively running inside of the ecosystem, and what kind of tools and data can they access? And then I think what's most critical, and where we have a similar observation, Vern, to what I think you're making in the code security space, is how are you actually going to enforce your policies, their custom policies in real time, where our conclusion is you need AI to help you secure and govern AI. And I think, these sets of challenges combined into the lack of a single control plane or a single pane of glass is what stood out to me the most from, like, I think the audience in the room, and pretty directly tied into the types of challenges that we're looking at being able to solve in Rubrik. So I mentioned I wouldn't really go too much into the depths of like what our solution architecture really looks like. Mostly wanted to be able to share the data. And I think I'll just like end by saying that, when we think about like what the required capabilities are, just the one slide I'll share in context for this is that we really think there needs to be a layer between the users, agents, and the applications and the underlying models that they provide that can do three key things. The first is continuous monitoring and observability, be able to actually detect what's happening as it happens. The second is real-time AI-driven governance. This means the ability to define policies and enforce policies using small language models. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more in a Q&A about why that's important. And then the final is like having a way to be able to make sure that your business is not tanked if an AI agent makes a destructive mistake. So being able to recover and rewind any types of mistakes that an AI agent can make. So these are the three capabilities that we've been thinking about at Rubrik, and it was really great to, I think, see kind of the resonance inside of the room and how much it matched up to the challenges that people are seeing slow down AI adoption today.
Yeah, another thing that's fascinating, since we are kind of on this, like what's happened since then, I mean, something very profound happened on Friday, which is all of a sudden Anthropic, and we spend a lot of time talking about Anthropic right now, and that's a boardroom conversation for a lot of companies, is all of a sudden a national security threat. Like now companies, anybody that does business with the US government apparently will not be able to use Anthropic or be banned from doing business with the government. And so I think, as I think about that, and I love your thoughts, but as I think about it, it kind of gives you clarity on why the harnesses that you have needs to be abstracted away for quality, for observability, for security, for compliance, need to be fairly independent. Yeah. Because even if you look at coding, like 6 months ago, the flavor of the season was Cursor. Today it's Claude. We don't know what it will be in the next 3-4 months, but it could be entirely something different. And so for people here listening in, I think it's like, you've got to be cautious. Yes, you can jump in and create really interesting initiatives on these foundational platforms yourselves. But I think you've got to ask the question of like the switching costs, and as your business evolves, as the macro world we live in evolves. And again, I don't know if there's an easy answer there, but like Friday changed a lot of things for a lot of companies.
Totally. I mean, I think it underscores 2 points. The first is what you mentioned in terms of coverage, which is the way that I think Bipul, who's the co-founder CEO for Rubrik, has framed it before is when it comes towards securing AI, you need a Switzerland-like player that can go and plug into this. And I actually think there's a number of different reasons you need this. The first is, what you mentioned. No one is just dependent on one model or one organization today. Even if you have like a Microsoft heavy shop, they typically have Copilot, Copilot Studio, and they're also doing their own things with a tool like Claude or Claude Code. So there's just a fragmentation where the tooling and ecosystem looks like that requires, a centralized pane of glass from like an independent party. The second, I think, is like really in terms of incentives. Anthropic's tooling is probably going to work really well for Anthropic's tooling, and we've seen this like with every hyperscaler and vendor, that's existed in the past. But if you want vendor agnostic tooling, oftentimes that has to come from someone that doesn't have that direct skin in the game. And this is where, when we consider the ability to use AI models to help you secure and govern AI, you see things like when you build in custom guardrails into an agent, those are ones that actually are pretty prone towards different types of attacks, whether those are jailbreaking attacks or prompt injection attacks. People are getting pretty good at tricking the agent to forget the guardrails that you actually placed on it. So you really need a secondary supervisory system that I think can look at this, can look at code output, can look at the agent's output, the MCP tool calls that it's making. And that's where I think that, a lot of the opportunity exists for any of the players that are thinking about how they're going to accelerate AI. If you're thinking about how you're accelerating AI right now, I think like these are the types of challenges to solve, less so, what the next model version or release needs to be. And that's, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you reminded me about a really crazy example about this very topic. Anthropic, while releasing everything every day, also released agent sandboxing. And so now everybody's like, great, why do I need to go buy a product that does agent sandboxing? Again, I don't have skin in the game, but independently just talking about it. And it turns out, there's a post, if you haven't seen it, that the agent will automatically, whenever it chooses to, disable the sandbox and break out of the sandbox and do things in your system. And you have no way to turn that control off. So when I talk about configurability and control, in an enterprise, if you have this agent sandbox and you relied on Anthropic to do sandboxing for your agents, and it could break out at any point and you have no control, it's kind of a crazy world, right? And so this independence layer, I think, is super, super critical. But I know we're kind of getting into about minute 38, 39. Dave, I'll let you kind of give your closing statements, but I want to just let everybody know we're going to take questions. I see some already coming in, but if you haven't already had the chance to, and you have some questions or even just thoughts, as the world has evolved quite rapidly, please start putting them in the Q&A section, and we'd be happy to take them in a minute here.
Yeah, let me close actually by just plugging off on something you said, which is like there's many different flavors of the month, and maybe some number of months ago, maybe Cursor was one of those. I'll just like flash this up, which is a tweet that I think was shared maybe a week ago. People are talking about how Cursor is dead because Claude Code is there. And it's like, can someone explain to me how they're at 1.3 billion ARR, closing the year at 2 billion, right? Like this type of growth rate at scale was unheard of overall, but we're seeing that still compound. What I think that means is like, while we might nitpick about, one particular vendor or where someone else is doing better than the other, like the macro trend is so large that I think it's, really driving a lot of the adoption across any tool that you're using. So like, I would say like whether or not you're, if you had $1 invested in OpenAI's Codex and Cursor, if you had that in like Claude Code, what you're probably going to see is maybe someone takes a relative share of that pie, but the pie is growing so quickly because we're using the technology so much. So I think like the closing thought that I really had, and I got to say, one of the things that stood out to me from the CISO summit was there's a perception out there that the security team is the team of no, like they're stopping you from doing things, they're blocking you. But the consistent thing I heard from the organizations and like the folks there was, we want to say yes. We think adopting AI is like an existential need for the enterprise, and we are going to do everything in our power to be able to say yes. I think parting thought is like, that is ultimately the mentality and culture of teams that I think are going to both be alive and thrive over the next 5 to 10 years. And so if you're thinking about like your internal adoption towards AI, my first thought is like, this has to be the number one priority for the vast majority of companies as they think about today, because it's going to be a lack of a competitive advantage if it's not. And, there's this thread about, is AI going to take my job? I think the answer that I like the best is AI might not take your job, but someone who knows how to use AI better than you might take your job. I think that's going to exist at a company level. So prioritize the adoption and make sure that this is something that you are actually developing the in-house expertise towards. Once you do, I think it's likely you'll run into the same types of challenges that some of our early customers and your early customers are, starting to run into, which is, how do I make sure that we can do this securely? And just know that I think platforms like ours are able to provide, that level of assurance and guarantee for what you're looking to do. So adopt AI. Don't be afraid to, to get into it, and then make sure you get the right tooling and stack so that you can actually unleash agents, not risk. What are your parting thoughts as you think about it, Varun?
I think you've summed it up really, really well. The last piece I'll say is, having multi-month plans and strategies are almost always going to be wrong, because everything is changing by the day. Like I every day wake up and I'm like, am I ready to open the news and open LinkedIn and see what just happened overnight? Because something probably did. So anyway, look, let's go into Q&A. So Amy, maybe you can even help us out here with some questions as they come along. And for the folks that are on, please do share your thoughts and questions along the way. And I think the first question here is, how will AI risk evolve over the next year? And what should orgs be doing now to prepare? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think that, look, we basically underwrote one trend when we launched the rubric Agent Cloud, and we named it the rubric Agent Cloud, not AI Cloud, which was the rise of agents. And so I think if we think about how is AI risk going to evolve, it's going to follow essentially the shift, I think, in AI to becoming more agentic. Now, every time I think I say that, it's important to provide a definition of agents, because if you ask 5 people, you'll get 7 definitions. In my view, agents are essentially LLMs that get access inside of your organization to tools, to applications. They're basically models that can actually take action inside of your organization. So that's the shift that's really happening. 24 months ago, ChatGPT was a great way to vibe write a blog post, or like just come up with a way to be able to interactive. But now what I'm doing is I'm actually hooking up AI systems to my email, to my calendar, to my systems of record. And so the types of risks that I think are going to actually evolve the most are going to be ones that have like a blast radius around the fact that you have non-deterministic models getting access to enterprise IT applications that weren't built for them. What do you think, Varun? What do you see in terms of where risk is going to go in the next 12 months?
Like, I think there's two parts to this. There's what are the same kind of problems, but they'll kind of explode 10 times larger because there's more volume of code, more velocity at which people are writing this. And I was just talking to a CIO at this conference yesterday, and his number one focus right now is how does he open the development to non-developers in his company? Because without his standardization, everybody's already using Vercel and Replit and Lovable. And he's like, well, I just want to try to bring some standardization so at least I can bring that code into my Git. So I think to me, the biggest thing will be, at least on the application and software security side, is not only did the amount of code and volume at which it's being generated by your trained professionals accelerate, but your bigger risk is going to be also the vibe coders, or pretty much anybody in the company that has a desire to ship a new web form, a campaign page, landing page that might have customer PII data that they're collecting, right? Like, so much can happen. And so how do you kind of make sure you have visibility and put some controls and guardrails so these people can do it effectively, because they're not trained software professionals. You can't send them your secure coding guidelines. So I think one is just blast radius for the normal things. The second thing is the new risk vectors that we haven't previously encountered because the architecture doesn't exist. Like I said, a lot of it is people attacking you in English language, and a lot of that is focused on your developer workstations where these coding agents are working. So your developer workstations just became really, really intensely in focus. And I think as security, at best, we normally have our normal EDR, XDR products running like CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, but they don't understand the software development nuances, right? They're not looking for malicious packages. And so a lot of our customers are now having conversation around, how do I put package firewalls on my developer machines so they can't even bring in something malicious, whether it's an MCP or an NPM package or whatever else. And so the question there would be, do you have the right level of visibility of what's happening inside of these coding agents? Do you know if they're breaking out of normal work streams, right? Like Cowork's powerful but dangerous. It can do a lot of stuff and cause a lot of damage. So how do you kind of look out for that? So anyway, fascinating world. Let's take one more and then we'll wrap up here, which is, when have you mostly seen traditional security approaches fail to catch AI supply chain risks? I think it's everything that I mentioned. I could kick it off. And then I think it's also what you and I talked about, which is we always assumed in security that we would be able to preempt the scenario where things would go wrong and have rules for it, written in grep or linters or whatever. And in the modern world, at the speed of change, we just don't know what could be the thing that bites us next. So to your point, we've got to unleash agents for detection of problems that we haven't even really anticipated, yet you need a fair level of consistency and reliability in their ability to find these things. I'll give you an example. We ran our AI SAST against OpenClaw and found 6 0 days that were reported and subsequently made public by the maintainers that were, again, just unanticipated things, more business logic centric issues. So I think, to me, you've got to answer the question, how are you scaling code reviews for business logic flaws that are just traditionally not been a problem in your supply chain?
Yeah, I think like my observation is pretty much very consistent, which is you can't use yesterday's rules approaches for tomorrow's like AI related risks. And so this is why I think a lot of times these policies live on paper and they sound good, but you actually need software to be able to help you solve these challenges really in practice. And that's where traditional approaches are going to fail, because the rate at which models can make decisions and the diversity of output and the ways they can make those decisions is too broad. I was playing around with Claude Cowork as an example, and I didn't give it access to Google Drive, but I asked it to upload a document, or sorry, I asked it to create a document in a Google Doc. It found out it didn't have access to Google Drive, so what did it do? Well, it went and just opened up a browser window and then started to click on, the upload button, opened up like my local file system navigator and wrote a doc locally and then started to upload it directly there. There's just way too many things in terms of how AI can operate that I think it's that you can try and play the whack-a-mole game with writing a rule or regex for everything, but it's going to fail immediately. So I think, we're seeing the same observations, whether it's in code security or general agentic applications. And I think that's what we're going to see the next generation of platforms really help you secure.
Well, we live in a crazy world. It was good to catch up. It's, again, unbelievable as we were talking. And a lot of this was impromptu coming up, thoughts about what's happened in the last 6 weeks that I imagine if we do this again in another 6 weeks, there'll be a whole host of headlines to talk about. But I hope for those of you that joined us, you found it helpful. We look forward to staying in touch. And if you have any questions on anything we discussed today or other thoughts, please share offline. Thank you so much, Dev.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone. All right.